remain an objective phenomenon. It is true that we are accustomed to compare our internal images to objects, and we consider them as little inferior carbon copies or duplicates. An object presents vivacity and clarity which are superior to those of an image of it. The object thus contrasts with the image, and, to borrow Taine's excellent term, it acts as its reducer. When the two are present together, the object comes to the fore, and the image retreats, becoming something absent. But what is the object itself which is present? What is it made of? The same stuff as the image. It is made of sensations. It is a perceived thing. Its esse is percipi, and it and its image are homogeneous, generically so. If I think of my hat that I left just now in the cloakroom, where is the dualism, the disjoint, between the imagined hat and the real hat? It is a real, absent hat with which my mind is occupied. I think of it, for practical purposes, as if it were a reality. If it were present on this table, the hat would provoke a movement of my hand. I would pick it up. In this same way, this conceived or imagined hat will soon determine the direction of my steps. I will go out to get it. The idea I have of it will continue up until the point where the hat is tangibly present, when it will harmoniously dissolve. I conclude, therefore, that whilst there is dualism for practical purposes, because images are different from objects, take their place, and bring us to them, there is no reason to say that they are essentially different in nature. Thought and actuality are made of the same thing, the stuff of experience in general. The psychology of external perception leads us to the same conclusion. When I see an object in front of me, such as a table of such and such a shape, and at such and such a distance, it is explained to me that this experience is down to two things: to a material sensation which comes through my eyes and brings the element of exterior reality, and to ideas which awake in me, meet this reality, class it, and interpret it. But who can tell, within the table concretely perceived, what is sensation and what is idea? External and internal, extended and unextended, fuse together and become inseparable. This recalls the circular panoramas, where real objects, rocks, grass, broken wagons and so on, which occupy the foreground, are ingeniously linked to the canvas that makes up the background, representing a battle or a landscape, so that it is hard to tell the object from the painting. The seams and joints are imperceptible. Could it happen like that, if the object and the idea were completely different in nature? I am convinced that similar considerations to these will have also already provoked doubts in you about the alleged dualism of the world, and there are other reasons to doubt which arise. There's a whole realm of adjectives and attributes which are not either wholly objective or subjective, but which we use sometimes in one sense and sometimes in another, as if enthralled in their ambiguity. I'm talking about the qualities that we appreciate in things, to put it one way, the ethical or moral aspects of things, their value to us. Where, for example, is beauty to be found? Is it contained in a statue, in a sonata, or in our souls? My colleague at Harvard, George Santayana, has written a book on aesthetics, The Sense of Beauty, where he calls beauty objectified pleasure. It's true that, in this context, we could talk about projection to the exterior. We think of a pleasant warmth and of a sensation of pleasant warmth in the same way. The rarity and preciousness of a diamond seem to us essential as qualities. We might speak of a terrible storm, or a detestable man, or a shameful act, and we think ourselves to be speaking objectively, even though these expressions are about nothing more than our own emotional sensibilities. We even talk about a wretched journey, a glum sky, a kind breeze, or a cruel midday heat. This animist way of looking at things, which seems to have been the style of primitive man, is very easily explained. And Mr. Santayana, in another recent book, The Life of Reason, has made this explanation by the tendency to attribute to an object the things we experience in its presence. The division of subjective and objective comes from a sophisticated act of reflection, which we are wont to defer on many occasions. When practical necessity doesn't pull us towards it, it seems as if we prefer to delude ourselves with vagueness. Secondary qualities such as heat, sound and light themselves no longer have vague explanations. For practical purposes, and as far as common sense is concerned, they are absolutely physical and objective. For the physicist, they are subjective. For him, they are the form, mass and movement which give rise to an external reality. For the philosophical idealist, on the other hand, form and movement are just as subjective as light and heat, and only the unknown thing itself, the noumenon, enjoys a complete non-mental existence. Our private sensations retain some of this ambiguity. There are illusions of movement which prove that our primary sensations of movement are generalized. It is the whole world, including us, that moves. We currently distinguish our own movement by reference to the movement of the objects around us, and among those objects we can discern some that remain still. But it is from a vertiginous height that we today fall back to a primary lack of differentiation. You are all no doubt aware of the theory that wants to make emotions the sum of bodily and muscular sensations. It has caused a lot of controversy, and we're yet to see universal agreement around one opinion on the matter. You will also be aware of the controversies over the nature of mental activity. Some hold that it is a purely spiritual force, and that we have an immediate perception of it as such. Others claim that what we call mental activity, effort or attention for example, is only the conscious aspect of certain operations to which our body plays host: muscular tensions in the head and throat, the stop and go of breathing, the flow of blood, and so on. However these controversies are resolved, their existence clearly proves one thing. It is very hard, maybe even impossible, to know, simply by private inspection of certain phenomena, whether they are physical in nature, occupying extended space and so on, or whether they are purely mental and internal. We must always find reasons for putting forward an opinion. We need to find the most probable way of classifying the phenomenon, but at the end of the day, it may be that all our usual classifications are motivated more by practical necessity than by some faculty we may have for perceiving two ultimate, distinct essences, which together make up the framework of existence. Each of our bodies gives us an almost violent sense of contrast with the outside world. Everything coming from inside the body is more private and important to us than that which comes from elsewhere. It is identified and classified with our ego. Who really knows how to distinguish soul, life, and breath? Even our private images and memories, which only act on the physical world by the intermediary of our body, seem to be part of that body. We treat them as internal, we class them with our emotions. It has to be said, basically, that the question of the dualism of mind and matter is a long way from being finally resolved. And that's the end of the first part of my lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to instill in you my doubts and the reality, as well as the importance, of the problem. Myself, after long years of hesitation, I have come to understand my position clearly. I believe that consciousness, as it is commonly represented, whether as an entity or as pure activity, but in any case as fluid, unextended, diaphanous, empty of proper content, but knowing itself directly, in a word, spiritual, is, I say, a pure chimera. The totality of concrete realities that the word consciousness ought to cover deserves a completely different description. A description of the kind that a philosophy that pays attention to facts and that knows how to make an analysis will from now on be able to provide, or rather, to begin to provide. And this brings me to the second part of my lecture. It will be much shorter than the first, because if I develop it to the same extent, it will be far too long. For this reason, I will restrict myself only to some indispensable remarks. Let us say that consciousness, or Bewusstheit, conceived as an essence, an entity, an activity, an irreducible part of each experience, should be suppressed, that the fundamental and, so to speak, ontological dualism should be abolished, and that we should suppose to exist what we have up until now called the content, the inhalt of consciousness. How can philosophy extricate itself from the vague sort of monism that results? I'm going to attempt to give some positive suggestions, although I'm afraid that without the necessary development my ideas will not shed much light. but perhaps it will be enough to indicate the starting point of the journey.